Well, we're back with a very special episode of Around the Galaxy, part of the SSW network. We're doing it as an ATG live. So we have people hanging out with us on Twitter and on YouTube and on Facebook, watching us while we record this. As you heard, if you were with us earlier, you've seen that, yeah, it doesn't always go super smooth, but we're doing the best we can. We are talking about the good, the bad, and the controversy of the sequels. And the way we're going to go about doing this, we just went through sort of our history, what it meant leading up to the sequels, and now we're going to go through it film by film. We're going to talk about the good stuff. We're going to talk about the bad stuff. We're going to talk about the stuff that may or may not have worked for certain people, for us in particular, and talk about where we go from here. And so Nick, let's talk a little bit about the first movie, the one called The Force Awakens. What I remember, my first sort of memory of The Force Awakens is that it literally felt like forever for the title to drop. And I remember I was at a conference in California when it dropped, and I just like I am with every single Star Wars movie title, I was like, oh, that sounds cool. But I think this one actually hit me a little bit. It hit me much better than The Phantom Menace, because that title to me was that took me some time. That took me some time to get to. Do you remember finding out about the title, or you were not? I mean, again, as you've said before, different times, right? So we weren't quite as fully connected all the time thinking about Star Wars. I mean,
I was on the tip of looking for, the trailer to come out. I was ready for the movie. I don't know if there was a whole lot of like, oh, that's what the title is going to be. Like with Rise of Skywalker, that was a much bigger deal because that was Celebration Chicago. There was the video. There was, Colbert hosting the panel and Ian McDiarmid, like that whole thing. But for some reason, the announcement of the title of this one does not stick as much as the trailer itself does. Like we get that trailer, you get Kylo in the woods. The first time the two pieces of the lightsaber shoot out of the sides, like that was that polarizing moment there. I'm like, oh, this is different. Something crazy is going on here.
But and it was also kind of a hint to the change in the way Star Wars was perceived, because you mentioned the trailer. Yes, a lot of people okay, sorry about that. Yeah, a lot of people a lot of people recall the lightsaber. But I also recall it was the first time that we got our first taste of the toxicity in the fandom, because our first image is Finn. It's John Boyega. It's a black stormtrooper. And this was the first time that we saw how Star Wars in the current age of the internet was going to be received. Now, was it as bad as some of the stuff we've seen since? No. And that's not to minimize it at all, because in no way is it acceptable, good, or whatnot. But it was the first time that I remember seeing commentary about the people in Star Wars. And it was a woman, and it was, it was also, so if we even, let's take out those pieces of it, you did have the commentary. There was the initial, that early internet world of, that's a stupid lightsaber. Why do they need a cross guard on a lightsaber? Well, because it's a freaking movie. But it was the early times of a little bit of internet ugliness, if I recall correctly. So you mentioned before about this polls that we did on Twitter. Interesting, and I'll bring them up now, and we can reference them again, because interestingly, it has on Rotten Tomatoes, which put as much weight into it as you want or not. It's got a 93 critic score, which is a very strong score, and it has an 85 audience score. Again, a very strong score. When we asked our thousands of Twitter followers what their favorite Star Wars sequel trilogy film is, Force Awakens came in second at 27%. Last Jedi came in first at almost 60%, and The Rise of Skywalker came in last at 13%. Again, doesn't mean that that's all. We made sure to really caveat it as, which is your favorite of them. And then interestingly,
was that? Go ahead. Can you tell me how many people responded to that survey?
I could, but I'd have to look it up. I'm not sure.
That's okay.
It's a couple
Actually, you
hundred.
keep talking. I'll look it up. I
think
it.
I think it's a couple hundred. And I think the thing to keep in mind, if we're being really honest, is the people who follow ATG Cast on Twitter tend to fall in a similar mindset as us, right? So we also asked their least favorite, and The Rise of Skywalker was overwhelmingly the least favorite at 69%. Last Jedi came in at 18%, 18.5%, and The Force Awakens came in at 12%. So I don't know what that means per se, but it certainly means that there was what was interesting was there was not, if you look at these, the one that was the favorite and the one that was the least favorite are pretty strong feelings on that, which I think really goes to the way people feel about the sequels in general. But again, so one of the things that I wanted to bring up, and you and I have talked about this a lot, is J.J. Abrams was writer and director, storyteller of this return to Star Wars. And it is a beat for beat reboot of Star Wars. And when I wrote my original review way back in 2015, I pointed that out, and I pointed out as not a bad thing either. So if I understand what a reboot is essentially telling a story, retelling a story, but making some variation to it. So, instead of having a farm boy from a desert planet, you have an abandoned orphan female girl at
also on a desert planet.
Also on a desert planet. You had a giant Death Star type thing. You have a bad guy in a mask. You start the movie literally with a photo
hiding plans in a robot.
Correct. Right. You literally starting in the most Star Wars way possible. And again, while some people use that as a critique, to me, it felt like the right thing to do. What it was doing to me was it was showing that they weren't walking away from what we knew. They sort of put us in a nice, sort of comfortable chair. They put us in a place that we were going to be comfortable with. And they were rebooting the story. They were retelling Star Wars without retelling Star Wars, without doing the untouchable thing of reshooting and recreating Star Wars.
And there's a key line, one of the first lines in the movie, speaking directly to a lot of fans of our age, a lot of fans of a certain generation and era who had issues with the prequels and still hadn't gotten over it. That line was spoken by the wisdom tree from Game of Thrones, the three-eyed raven himself. He said, "This will begin to make things right."
Yep.
The movie opens up that way.
The very first line. Yep.
Yeah.
And honestly, I remember sitting in the theater and saying to myself and getting it like, aha, okay, they are resetting things.
Right.
Because again, as we said at the top, and I know it's not the popular opinion, but at this point, I was still not yet a prequel fan. I was still working my way through what I thought of them. And again, was happy that we were getting new Star Wars. And Max von Sydow saying, this will begin to make things right. That was a message. That was a message to the fans like me. Did you receive it that way? Or did you?
I did. I absolutely did, because there had been enough time had passed. It had been this thing of like, okay, I went through the first time where I thought we're never going to get more Star Wars. And then George Lucas made 3 more, and he made the ones that set up the ones that I grew up and loved. So, I mean, in theory, that's a complete set, right? You get all the way back to when Darth Vader was a kid through the redemption of Darth Vader. 6 movies, nice, clean, tidy. That's it. Yep. What more am I allowed to expect or think of or ask for? And then this thing showed up. And again, in the opening of the movie, that was exactly what I heard. What does he say? This
will begin to set things right.
This will begin to set things right. That's it.
Yep.
And I just went, oh, he's talking to me. Like, he's talking to us. He's talking to a certain group of fans, which kind of continues. And we're going to get into that with The Last Jedi even more, which is 1,000,000% part of why I love The Last Jedi the way I do. But it set up from the beginning, hey, we're here. We hear you. We see you. Because when the original trilogy was made, there were fans, but there wasn't this kind of fan community.
Right.
Then when the prequels were made, the internet is more of a thing, but not remotely what the internet is now, where people are chronically on the internet, you know, ourselves included, you know, 27 hours a day, that it became that thing of recognition. The meta narrative that will feed through these movies is real. And I think it has to be. And we've seen it certainly with the TV shows, and we've seen it with creators who have been attacked. Somebody said earlier in the chat, you know, when they realized what Ahmed Best went through, you know, how much that meant to them or spoke to them. We've heard the stories recently from Clayton Sandell about Jake Lloyd. You know, we've seen these actors and creators in the 90s and 2000s going through this with the prequel trilogy. We get it in the sequel trilogy. Kelly Marie Tran, you know, John Boyega, like the things that also happened to them. But we live in an era now where companies, creatives, people behind these things are also aware of that environment. They're not working in a vacuum of, oh, I didn't know that people were mad about things. Right. They know it. So what do? Take it and use it against them. Turn it around.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, it's funny. So we will definitely keep that, put a pin in that one, because I do think that there's that's a critique of the Rise of Skywalker for sure.
Right.
And I have opinions on that as well.
No.
But I think you're right. And I think it's fully intentional that they chose J.J. Abrams, not because he was just a great filmmaker and had done some great things, but he was the king of reboots. He did Star Trek. He did Mission Impossible. He was the executive producer on Westworld, which was a reboot of that movie from the 60s or 70s. Yeah. He, of course, also is the king of the mystery box. He can create stories that will pull you in further, which, of course, if you think about it, The Empire Strikes Back was really the first that I can recall major mystery box where the film ended and said, stay tuned. Right. I mean, other than, of course, the serials of the 30s and 40s, but it was a reboot. And thank you, Jedi of Chicago, saying that him rebooting Star Trek was the key. I think that was 100% it. And again, that's why I say The Last Jedi or The Force Awakens is a reboot of Star Wars. It is not a direct copy. Well, it is, but it's not intended as a shot for shot copy of A New Hope, but all the elements are there. You have, I mean, it starts exactly the same. It's the guy in black, the bad guy in black, who has a direct line to the Emperor, is there. He's brutally taking out soldiers. I mean, the whole opening is there.
He's bringing the stormtroopers, and somebody's hiding plans or maps or whatever in a droid,
right,
and sending the droid off so they can get captured.
Right. Leia,
heard that story before.
Leia, wise cracking to Vader. Poe, I can't hear you with all that apparatus.
Yeah, the apparatus. Who talks first? You talk first?
It's all there. But again, I think some people use that as an opportunity to critique it from a negative perspective, whereas I saw it as, I get it. They are rebooting this franchise so that we can get new stories. In fact, the end of my, I'll read it. The end of my my initial critique, my initial review of The Force Awakens was, at the end of the day, this Star Wars film is what we all wanted the prequels to be. Again, listen, I get it. All right. Is what we all wanted the prequels. If episodes 8 and 9 are done right, however, they will not dwell on the fond memories of that this one evoked, like Rey flying the Falcon at the end of the movie. They need to let these new characters take control of the story, or as beautiful as this one was, they will fail. I have faith that The Force Awakens has begun to, quote, set things right. And in 18 months, we'll know if it worked. Of course, it was 2 years, not 18 months. But point being there, they had to do this. They had to reboot. They had to hand it off to the new characters. And that's one of the things that pissed people off, was that they handed it off to new characters. Now, I'll never forget Mike Morrissey, I think it was, who is a Star Wars author, was on Around the Galaxy 100 years ago. And one of the things he said was that the biggest problem for the sequels was that they were episodes 7, 8, and 9. If they were just the continuing saga of the Star Wars story, they would have been free of the shackles of making sure these stories were directly connected. The fact that, you know, we'll get to it in a second. In fact, maybe we should start to dig into the good, the bad, and the controversy now.
Yeah.
But you did have Luke Skywalker was promised. He doesn't have any lines in the movie.
Yep.
And so that was a bit of the controversy. But let's talk about the things that we liked about this movie. I'll start. You know, it captured that feel and excitement of Star Wars. It captured something that wasn't there, in my opinion, in the prequels. It has. I'm going to play this. This is a very short clip, an 8-second clip. But this to me is my favorite. This captures what this movie did.
Hey. Are you okay? Yeah.
I love the interplay between Finn and Rey throughout the movie.
Throughout the movie.
It's such a shame that by the time we get to Rise of Skywalker, it was diminished. And I'm going to get there. Oh, yes. If you're following along, I'm going to get there. But that interplay between the two, that like when they're in the Falcon, she's like, that one, no, that one, that one, that one. I love that.
Boyfriend, cool boyfriend. When he climbs up to look out the window and he stands on her head, like from the get-go, quit taking my hand when they're running in the desert. Like every single bit of it is two strong people. I don't need you. He's trying to help, need you. Like, just, it's glorious. It works so well. And it was so appealing. And then him, you know, trying to be the imposter. First Order. Oh yeah, I'm the rebellion.
Big deal.
What is it? Resistance. Resistance. Yeah. Resistance. You know, Han calls him big deal. We'll get into the whole Han thing. Like, oh my God. But like when he's talking to BB-8, come on, you know, help me, droid, please. Like that crap's funny. The thumbs up from BB-8. And there is a debate online, and I think you know this, Pete, but there is a debate online. Our friends at Star Wars Minute love to help propagate this. Does BB-8 give Finn a thumbs up, or is he giving him the middle finger when he pops that lighter out?
I never thought it was the middle finger until our friends at Star Wars Minute said that, and now I'm ruined.
Said it, and
now it's ruined.
Yeah, I watched it this weekend, and there's a part of it that was like, it might be, but it is. And TW says it right here. It felt like that original trilogy humor again, humor, action, drama. Day Zero Revelation as Rey. I mean it. I agree with you completely. That's such a great character. She develops, she grows. I watched the movies in preparation for this. I watched all 3 of them in the last 2 days, I guess. All of my family has gone to summer camp, except for one of my 16-year-olds, the one who cares the least about Star Wars. And so I even said, hey, watch these with me. I want your opinions and insight. And she did. Yeah. And so some of that will fold into these conversations. But you're exactly right. That interplay hooked me from the beginning. And that's before we even get to Chewie, we're home. And before we get to you changed your hair, same jacket when Leia shows up. And all of the things that appeals to my 1978 born, 80s loving child.
Well, and honestly, I think that is that again goes to the freaking stupid meme of showing senior citizen versions of Mark Hamill, Billy D. Williams, Carrie Fisher, and Harrison Ford saying, this is what we were ripped off. We didn't get this.
Right.
We got it. We got what we deserved. And again, I hate the phrase, and I will go down in flames on this. But any fan, whether it's positive or negative, who posts, we deserved X. No, you deserve nothing. You get the story you get. And if you don't like that story, that's okay.
Nobody's keeping you here.
100% fine. Nobody's keeping you here. That's 100% right, Nick. Nobody's keeping you here. But I think the handoff in Force Awakens was pretty perfect. We didn't know Carrie Fisher was going to pass away, which we'll get into on The Last Jedi. But the handoff was really nice. And Harrison Ford got what he wanted from
what he wanted.
The Jedi. Han Solo goes down in a sacrificial moment. He does what he needs to do. He was the Obi-Wan of this movie. He he died at the hands of the Vader figure in an effort to help his cause and help people get away. Of course, he was also trying to save, but much like Kenobi, who said to Vader, when there's and now that of course we have the Kenobi series, we know there's a little bit more. Gosh, I wish I could help this guy. Same thing with Han and Kylo, but I think it was the handoff we deserved. Literally, I mean, literal handoff at the end of the movie from Rey to Luke with the saber. But what else would you put in the good category? I mean, there's a ton of things, and I know you just hit on a bunch of them, but
to me, honestly, it was just how it felt familiar. It felt, for me as a Star Wars, it felt like Star Wars. And I think that a big part of that was, you know, something that was a big controversy, something that was a problem for me early on when the prequels came out was, you know, you give somebody a toy or a new skill. Like when my daughter learned to whistle, she walked around the house whistling 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I felt like Old Man Gower in It's a Wonderful Life when he yells at George Bailey and he's like, "Stop that damn whistling. You're not a canary." Like, I was like, you got to stop with the whistling. It's making me crazy. When the prequels came out, it was like, George, the blue screen, the green screen, we got to dial it down. Like, it felt cartoony. Like, there was a thing there. But in this movie, we brought back a lot of emphasis on practical effects. We brought back a lot of emphasis on practical sets, building things, building the Millennium Falcon set, building, you know, going to Abu Dhabi to the desert to watch Finn. There's the behind the scenes documentary. It's on YouTube. It's not on Disney Plus. And John Boyega is talking about walking across this thing with a wide shot from a distance, peeling off his stormtrooper armor in the middle of the desert. Like that makes it feel real. And that's what makes it feel like Star Wars. The first time I felt that in that movie, it's actually close to the clip that you played. But when Rey comes back with her findings and she's sitting at that table and she's scrubbing the things with the scrub brush, with the, you know, steel wool and the parts that she found, like that felt like Star Wars because it was practical. It was real. Somebody had their hand on it. It wasn't acting to a tennis ball on a stick. So I think to me, the reintroduction of practical effects coupled with this beautiful CGI that we have now, the beautiful technology that we have that continues to develop even beyond what we have now, I think that was a big part of it. It felt familiar. It felt like Star Wars. And then when you introduce Chewbacca and Han Solo and Carrie Fisher as Princess Leia into those things, that's when you're going, you know, that was my Chewie we're home moment. It's like, this feels like Star Wars. Star Wars, we're back.
But I'll use that to bridge into the bad, right? A little bit, because as you even said, I think at one point that because it felt familiar, maybe that's a little bit lazy. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, and I think that relates to kind of what you hit on early on. It wasn't a shot for shot remake of New Hope, but it has every single element going all the way through. Another Death Star. They say it in the briefing. Oh, it's another Death Star. No, it's way bigger. Like, no, it's a big ass.
It's another Death Star, guys. You got lazy.
Same thing. You know, we've got to blow up the thing that nobody knew could be the thing. Robot getting the plans at the, you know, the beginning. The hero gets captured so that the robot can get away with the thing we're trying to, like, that to me is the part that, you know, familiar but late. I've seen this movie. That was what I felt when I left. I went, I've seen this movie before. I mean, I like it. I like the first one. I like this one too, but I've seen this movie before. So when I say a little bit lazy, it really is mostly from the aspect of there was an opportunity to do what they did, but maybe color outside the lines a little bit more.
And I dare say that that is one of the things with this movie is there's not a lot of bad to it. And your biggest bad is that it's a reboot. And again, we talked about it at length earlier on. It was intended to be a reboot. So it's kind of hard to call that. And I'm with you though, because when I realized that Starkiller Base was another Death Star, I was like, this is Death Star 3. Like, we got to do something
We've
different.
had two. Let's do another one. Make it bigger. Make it built into a planet.
Right. How can you make a Death Star more scary?
But wait.
How about,
but then we go 2 more movies forward. We go The Last Jedi, and it's miniaturized Death Star tech on crate to break open the big ass door. And then we go to 9, and it's every single Star Destroyer has a Death Star
on every Star Destroyer.
So, it goes from Death Star, big ass Death Star. Now we're making Death Star like, no, you get a Death Star, and like Oprah handing out Death Stars.
The other issue that I have with it is actually something that is an issue only because they didn't fulfill the mystery boxes. There were so, and this again, this is a J.J. Abrams problem. J.J. Abrams set up 2 major mystery boxes to me, and he closed out the damn series. And we'll get to it when we talk Rise of Skywalker. But he missed, first of all, the vision of Rey should have appeared in every single one of those little scenes, those little snippets should have appeared somewhere in the next 2 movies. And, you know, I wrote my treatment for episode 9 that even Colin Trevorrow responded to. And the Knights of Ren should have been answered for. And again, we'll get to that when we get to Rise of Skywalker. The other thing is the mystery box around how did Maz get the lightsaber? She said that's a story for another time. Sounds like it's going to be a book sometime. I'm not going to read it. Sorry, it'll be a comic. Sorry, Chris, I won't be reading the comic book.
I'm gonna have to look it up on Wikipedia.
Right. I'm gonna thank you, Wikipedia, if you're hanging out for covering that for me, because you're right. I'm definitely not going to read that. But the mystery box, of course, of who Rey's parents were. Okay, we'll get to that for sure.
I have thoughts about that for sure.
But again, mystery boxes were left, which at the time was fine because we said this is going to be great. We have episodes 8 and 9 to come. We're going to get those stories. Now, as if you follow me on Twitter, you know that I'm also not a fan of necessarily having to give all the backstory. And I think that's why certain things in Last Jedi that people didn't like worked extremely well for me. Nobody knew who Emperor Palpatine was in Return of the Jedi. All we knew was that he was the bad guy. He needed to die, and that's okay. But to leave some of those mystery boxes unfulfilled turned into an issue and part of the controversy. Was there any other bad that I'm missing from you, Nick? Again, I feel like it's overall it's a solid movie. It's hard to find real bad with this movie.
It is a solid movie. And the other thing that I had put in our notes as we kind of shared this document back and forth about, you know, the bad, quote unquote, when it boils down, and we'll kind of get through this because we've still got 2 more movies to get through. Ultimately, this is the least interesting of the 3 movies to me personally. Because partially it felt like I've seen this movie before. I've already read this book. I know how it ends. But what happens in the next couple coming up, I spoiler alert for one of the other, polls that you put out there. But if I'm ranking them, this is my least favorite of the 3 sequel movies. And that's a surprise. And that's, that's the way it goes. But I've seen this movie before. It's not bad, but I know what happens. The next 2 actually push me a little bit outside my skis, as they say. It gets me, into territory that I'm not as familiar with. So for me, the other quote unquote bad, which, I say a lot of times, if my problems are, luxuries to 90% of the world, if this is what's bad about this particular Star Wars, it's still a fantastic movie.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it also kind of leads to the controversy, right? Because the only real controversy for this movie at the end of the day was that Luke had no lines. So a lot of people were kind of upset about that. But I thought it was perfectly done. And that Rey beat, okay, I'm going to throw this out here because I have to settle this. And this will be, we'll clip this out because this is something that I firmly believe in. People who complain that Rey beat Kylo with the lightsaber were not paying attention to the movie. And people tell me that about the somehow Palpatine return line. I'm ready for it. Bring it on. But you weren't paying attention to the movie because Rey eventually Skywalker, Rey Palpatine, just Rey.
Rey from
in
nowhere.
This movie, when we meet her, she when Finn meets her, she beats the crap out of him with a staff. She has been defending herself her entire life. She also had, as we heard in The Last Jedi, there's something that's been in her that she felt. So she may not have trained with Yoda for 48 hours on Dagobah, like apparently you need to have in order to not be a Mary Sue. She's not a Mary Sue because she has proven herself. Additionally, the entire movie, twice throughout the movie, Han Solo makes a big deal about how powerful the crossbow is. Chewie nailed Kylo with a crossbow. So Kylo's he's on injured reserve by the time she gets to him, right? So
so if I can even throw this maybe into I don't even think it's in the bad character, it's just in the nitpick category. 2 times in this movie, Han makes a big deal about the crossbow.
Right.
The bowcaster. I'm sorry, not the crossbow.
Right.
The
Sorry,
bowcaster.
you were right. Yep. Yep.
He makes a big deal about it. I like this thing.
Yeah.
Can I borrow that?
Yep.
Am I supposed to believe that in the like 30-ass years that they've been together, more than that since Solo, a Star Wars story, that Han's never once used that thing until now? Like, that's my nitpick. Those are the things that really I'm like, wait a minute. Come on now. That's what I really get worked up
See,
about.
the only way I can make that work, I agree with you. It is kind of silly that he never shot it once. Like they were out drinking some point and he was like, let me shoot that thing. The only thing I can think of in my head canon is that Chewie is so defensive of it. It took him being injured to have him finally give it up. But to your point,
to give it up.
But, and you're right. But that is the point though, is JJ went out of his way to say, hey, this thing is powerful. This thing kicks ass. This thing shot Kylo Ren in the side and he survived. And the scavenger who's never held a lightsaber but has fought.
But is a survivor.
A survivor.
And you know what? Nobody pitched a fit about the fact that Finn used that lightsaber to fight off the TR-8R stormtrooper. Like, you know, yes, he's had combat training because he's a stormtrooper and they probably taught hand-to-hand combat and
that is an awesome point.
And whatever the hell it is. But at the same time, Rey did the same thing. She didn't go to Stormtrooper Academy. She grew up on the hardscrabble streets of Jakku, USA. And she had to learn to take care of herself and defend herself and, you know, fight off the goons that were coming after her. Okay, great. So you put a laser sword in your hand. Same thing. It's not a big, long stick. It's a laser sword.
I love that you said that because you're right. I have never once heard somebody complain about Finn taking out it, not only like defending himself with the lightsaber, winning.
He killed a couple dudes.
Yeah. So you're 100% right. So again, the controversy for this film was contrived. A lot of it was looking back. It was rear view mirror controversy. Once people started to hate Rey in The Last Jedi, which we'll get to in a little bit after the break.
TW's got us Jakku USA.
That's our next shirt. All right, dude. As soon as we're done, I'm getting on Photoshop. TW, if you email me your address, man, if we make that shirt, it's coming to you. I promise you. But that's just it. There was so much rear view mirror controversy that came out of The Last Jedi for reasons that I am having a very difficult time proving, that I would love to get into. And Nick, if you'll stick around, I know you will, we've talked about this, but if you're willing to stick around, and if you who are listening to us and hanging out with us are willing to stick around, we are going to get to just the second of 3 movies. We're going to get into The Last Jedi, which is without a doubt the most controversial Star Wars film ever created. We thought it was The Phantom Menace, but oh no, we got The Last Jedi. So we'll be back in just a minute with more of the sequel trilogy, The Good, the Bad, and the Controversy.